I'm so excited to talk to you today about the doshas. They are the trendiest part of Ayurveda because you can take a quiz and discover your dosha. And we all love taking quizzes and we all love learning more about ourselves. But what really are the doshas? And how can knowing them really be super helpful for your health journey? So today we're going to dive into the doshas, what they are not, and also why balancing your doshas is so important for optimal health and greater happiness. And speaking of dosha quizzes, you know I've got you. I've also created a quiz that goes with this video so you can actually find out the dosha that's most prominent for you instead of trying to guess along the way. So take that quiz in the link below and we'll get started. If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, hit the subscribe button and the bell to be notified every time I post a new video about creating a happier, healthier mind, body, and life. For the past 4 years, I've been helping people implement the habits of Ayurveda in order to feel amazing in their bodies, confident in themselves, and more joyful in their everyday lives. So I know firsthand that this stuff really does work. So let's get right into it and you can start to benefit from it too. Before we get into the doshas, we actually have to talk about the 5 elements. So the ancient people of the Indian subcontinent who brought us Ayurveda divided the world into 5 different elements. They identified these as the building blocks of life, and the manifestation of these elements through our doshas gives rise to our unique differences between people, as well as different substances and even different behaviors can also include more or less of certain elements and thus certain doshas, which can bring us into balance or out of balance depending on our constitution and our life experiences. So I'm going to explain a little bit more about what I mean in a moment, but first let's identify the 5 elements. I like to identify them on my 5 fingers because it's sometimes easier to understand this way. So number 1 is going to be ether, or you might call it space. Then number 2 is air. You might also call this wind, or it's sort of like when space actually starts to move. That's air. Then you get fire, and then water and earth. So now that we've got all of the 5 elements on all of the 5 fingers, I can show you how they combine to create the doshas. When you have ether and air together, this gives rise to the Vata dosha. Then fire and a little bit of water mixed together give rise to Pitta. And then water plus earth give rise to Kapha. So now we can identify how these different elements and thus the different doshas, right, because the elements make up the doshas, how they can show up in our bodies both in a balanced way and an imbalanced way. Note that all of the elements and thus all of the doshas are present in all of us, but just to differing degrees. So you can sort of think of like a pie. Some people are born with a big slice of Pitta, a medium slice of Kapha, and a small slice of Vata. Some are born with bigger slices of Kapha or bigger slices of Vata. We're all different and all have at least some of each of them. Some are more tridoshic, meaning that they have all 3 in a pretty even balance. Others are more dual doshic, which means that they have 2 that are most prominent, and that's the most common. And then others are more monodoshic, meaning that they have 1 that's most prominent, and then the other 2 are much, much less prominent. So this unique combination of the doshas is something that you were born with, and it doesn't necessarily change throughout life. It's called your prakriti, which means original nature. Usually when I describe the constitution that you're born with, you would use the most prominent one, and then you follow that by the second most prominent, and you leave the third one out because it's just implied that it's there, it's included in your constitution anyway. So, for example, my prakriti is Pitta Kapha. This implies that I also have some Vata in my constitution, but it's to a lesser extent than the Pitta and the Kapha. Interestingly, as a coach, I'm actually not as interested in people's prakriti as I am in their vikruti, which is their state of imbalance. And that's because it doesn't really matter all that much what you were born with if you have an imbalance in a completely different dosha. For example, say you were born with Pitta Kapha like me, but because of the overstimulation of everyone on the planet right now, which is a manifestation of air and ether, you have a major Vata imbalance. So it would be most important to balance that dosha instead of worrying about Pitta and Kapha. The reason it's helpful to know your Prakriti is to be mindful that those are what you might go out of balance most easily. So if you do know that you're Pitta Kapha, while you're working on that Vata imbalance, you can also be aware to not get those other two doshas out of balance in the process. That's the reason that it's the most helpful to know your Prakriti as well. So let's get into the characteristics of each of the doshas, both when they are in balance and when they're out of balance. Let's start with Vata. Think for a moment about a person who has a lot of ether or space, like we talked about, and air, which is Vata in their constitution. What might that person look like? What might they act like? What might some of their strengths be, or what about their weaknesses? So someone who has a lot of Vata in their constitution will usually have a lighter frame, think air, ether, and either be very tall or very short. They have thinner skin, smaller bones, as well as cold hands and feet, and sensitive digestion. So they're going to tend to be easily excited, creative, lively, flexible, and they love to start new projects and take initiative, though they might not be as likely to follow through on what they start. Think about someone who might daydream a lot and, maybe have their head in the clouds, but who's super creative, great at getting things started when others might just drag their feet. They're your fun, spontaneous friend who always wants to do new and exciting things, but sometimes it might be hard to pin them down for plans. And that brings us to some of the imbalances of Vata. Again, anyone can have any of these imbalances, even if they don't have a lot of Vata in their constitution. So if you think about too much air, too much ether in your digestive tract, what comes to mind? You might think of bloating, gas, constipation, dehydration. All of these are Vata imbalances. And what about the rest of your body? You're going to have a lot of dryness because the movement of air creates dryness, right? You've been outside on a windy day when your lips and your skin dry out, your eyes dry out, you feel cold and you kind of feel frazzled from all of the movement of the air. And that's going to happen inside your body when you've got too much air and ether or Vata. Dry skin, dry hair, dry lips, dry nose, sinuses. You're also going to have more aches and pains when air gets trapped in your joints. You might have more weakness or unhealthy weight loss, restlessness, dizziness, worry and anxiety, insomnia, and feeling ungrounded. These are all Vata imbalances because there's too much air and ether in the body and the mind. That brings us to Pitta. Think about a person who has a lot of fire and then also a bit of water in their constitution. What might that person look like? What might they act like? What might be some of their strengths and weaknesses? So someone who has a lot of Pitta in their constitution will usually have a medium, symmetrical build, tend to be able to put on muscle quickly. Their body tends to run warmer because of that fire element inside of them, right? Heat. And they usually have really excellent digestion and a strong appetite because their digestive fire is higher. They're also going to tend to be bright, ambitious, outspoken, competitive. Think about the entrepreneur who works really hard, learns things easily, is discerning and really good at problem solving, but then who might tend to overwork or be overly critical to the point that they're stressed or controlling. And that brings us, of course, to the imbalances of Pitta. So if you think about too much fire in someone's digestive system, what comes to mind? You might think of indigestion, heartburn, ulcers, diarrhea, anything that feels hot or acidic. And what about the rest of the body? You're gonna have a lot of heat. So any excessive body heat, hot flashes, skin rashes, red skin, inflammation, burning sensations anywhere. These are all signs of too much Pitta. And then in the mind, being type A or neurotic, having excessive anger, frustration, irritability, being constantly contentious or argumentative, being hypercritical of yourself and others. These are all Pitta imbalances. And what about Kapha? So someone who has a lot of water and earth in their constitution has more Kapha. What might that person look like or act like? What might be some of their strengths or what might be some of their weaknesses? When someone has a lot of Kapha in their constitution, they're going to tend to have a stronger build, bigger bones, and the ability to gain weight easily. Note that This is neither good nor bad. None of the doshas are either good or bad, despite what diet culture might say. And we're gonna celebrate all of them, right? So Kapha is also going to tend to have excellent stamina. They're like the endurance athletes who maybe have a harder time getting started, but once they get going, they're totally unstoppable. Kaphas also tend to have smooth, radiant skin, regular digestion, though sometimes it tends to be a little bit slower, which is just normal for them, and sound sleep. And their tendency is to be calm, thoughtful, empathetic, loyal, patient. They're the friend whose presence is totally calming and totally supportive. They tend to be content, but can also get kind of stuck because they don't necessarily have as much fire to want to change things. And that brings us to the Kapha imbalances, which again, we can all have at different times in our life depending on what's going on, right? So if you think of too much earth and water, which, earth and water actually mix to create mud, right? If you think of that in someone's digestive system, what comes to mind? You might think of sluggish or sticky digestion. You might think of weight gain, even constipation due to that slow stickiness. And what about the rest of the body? So one direct manifestation of Kapha is mucus. Think colds, sinuses, infections, allergies, bronchitis, all of that kind of thing. When Kapha is out of balance, it can also create depressive symptoms, resistance to change, stubbornness, indecisiveness, avoidance of conflict, and also like excessive attachment to things, excessive attachment to relationships or houses or jobs or whatever else that may not be serving them anymore, but they can get kind of stuck in being attached to those things. So ask yourself, do I have any of these imbalances? And if you're still not sure, go ahead and take my dosha quiz, the best one on the internet, in my opinion, to see which one is most prominent for you right now so that you can start to actually balance it. One word of caution when working with Ayurveda and the doshas. I see this way too often, so I want to get right out in front of it. Often when we first start learning about the doshas, we put ourselves into a box and we say, I'm a Kapha, so I'm only going to eat Kapha foods and do Kapha things that are Kapha pacifying. And that is not what Ayurveda is about. Rather, we can learn about the doshas with a lens of embodied self-awareness, noticing how different habits, different foods, different behaviors actually make us feel. Your dosha is not a diet. Don't reduce yourselves to do and don't foods or exercises or other behaviors. This stuff is just a tool to help you cultivate a respectful relationship with your body and with yourself. You are a complex human being, and with the help of Ayurveda, you can start to identify how to honor your body and find balance. So please take this information with a grain of salt. The most important thing here is that you listen to your body and what it is actually telling you. Okay, so why is it actually important to know the doshas and identify which one or which ones are out of balance for you? The reason is that once you actually know which one is out of balance, you can start to bring it back into balance. And that is what Ayurveda is all about. So what is Ayurvedic balance in regards to the dosha? Being in balance means that all three doshas, and thus all 5 elements, right, which are what make up the doshas, are present in their natural proportions. This doesn't mean that all 3 of the doshas need to be in equal proportion. Rather, it means that they are in balance based on the constitution that you were born with, the prakriti we talked about earlier. In this way, we can harness the superpowers of whatever dosha or doshas were most prominent for us at birth. For example, if you've got a lot of Pitta in your constitution, you can balance it so that you don't have heartburn or acne or stress or irritability, but so that you can still harness the discipline and the fire that's inherent within you. Or if you've got a lot of Kapha, you can balance it so that you don't have mucus or sluggishness or over-attachment, but you can still harness the calm and the empathy that's inherent in your constitution. And also, if you have a lot of Vata, you can balance it so you don't have dry skin or constipation or anxiety, but you can still harness the creativity and enthusiasm that is your birthright. Obviously, we don't have time in one video to go into all of the details of each of the doshas, but hopefully you now have an understanding of each of them and how they relate to their elements, as it's much easier to understand them in this way rather than just trying to memorize the characteristics of each dosha. If you want to learn how to actually balance your doshas, check out the Ayurveda, the Key to Your Success mini course. In it, you will learn the lifestyle changes, food, herbs, and habits that are going to help you balance your doshas and get you feeling better than you've ever felt in mind, body, and spirit. If you want more on creating a happier, healthier you, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell to be notified the next time I post another video. And if you enjoyed this video, you're going to love this next one that dives deeper into what Ayurveda really is. Check it out. I'll see you in the next one.